I'm going to say anything else because we achieved everything. But it's a huge pleasure to introduce Ruth. Ruth, thank you for delivering a little bit later than planned, and Thomas Ashton.
I was extra fast because we've got a deadline because there's a kick-off at 5 o'clock, I think. And I know everyone's got choices tonight, and I think people online are probably like multitasking right now, put it that way. But thank you ever so much for having me to come and present to you today. It's been my pleasure to work with Andrew, with the Health and Safety Executive, Helen. I can see collaborators around the room, and with the Thomas Ashton Institute and University of Manchester. So it's a great honour to be here today. I think we've all been briefed to have your phone ready for a Slido later to participate in that. And what we're talking about today is a world of risk, and unheard voices and what we can learn from them. So I'm going to take you on a very, very broad gallop through our world risk poll, which Gallup was on. so let's get going. Before I start, actually, I should say our foundation, so the Lloyds Register Foundation mission is safety, and that's what's driving everything we do. So our mission is engineering a safer world, and that's the context for why we're really interested and why we partner with the Health and Safety Executive. So let's move along. Let's move along. Are we good? Yes. So who are the unheard voices? I talked about unheard voices. What have we asked them and why? So I'm going to take you through a journey of data, asking you to join in, and online as well. You'll get a chance to join in as well. So please have your phones ready online. And if there are things which I tell you where you think, what on earth is that about? Save that up for later. And we'll have a discussion around that, because there's loads of data that I'm going to show you, and in the foundation we're kind of like, well, why is that? Why do people think like that or act like that? And we haven't got the answers to those questions. What we can show you is the data. Okay. So why a world risk poll? This goes back to the grandfather, or the father of the world risk poll, Andrew. so Andrew, we asked Andrew about 6 years ago to do a study of foresight review for us on global safety evidence, to look at what's the evidence base for the kind of work that we do, what's published globally, how do we know where people are safe and unsafe. And he authored this great study for us, a foresight review on global safety evidence. And just to give this example here is a map of reported causes of death around the world. What you can see there is there are large parts of the world where there is no data available on what a cause of death is. Right? And if you look at China and India, which are relatively advanced and wealthy nations, that they have to do a sample registration system. So even in those countries, there's only a sample of why people died, and the rest of the world we kind of, we don't really know. And that's just one example, and that's a very basic thing. Why did someone die? But so if you think about that, well, why did someone get hurt? What are people worried about? What's hurting people? The coverage, the global coverage of that is very poor. And so we were approached by Gallup, we worked with Gallup to commission a world risk poll. Now our Evidence Insight Centre in the foundation, the world risk poll is one of the key elements of the work we do. We also have other publications, and we are establishing a centre about what works in safety. So I know there's a lot of safety professionals here today. There's a lot of fantastic evidence-based work going on in health and in other sectors, education, social policy. But actually for safety, we don't have a very good practice of what works, what interventions actually work. So we're establishing that under the direction of our new director, Nancy Hay, who is also online. So thanks, Nancy. You can wave at the end. So what is the World Risk Poll? It's a global poll. We use an instrument called the Gallup World Poll, and it's basically where you go out and you ask lots of people questions, and we cover 142 countries, the latest iteration, 147,000 interviews all around the world. Using the Gallup statistical methods, they reckon that covers 85% of the global population. So we're going out and talking to people who don't really get listened to. We published just yesterday our latest report, Resilience in a Changing World. The poll module takes 20 minutes. So basically there's 10 minutes of questions like what's your age, what's your income, what's your religion, all these sort of things. And then there's 10 minutes of questions all around risk and safety and your attitude to risk and safety and those sort of things. What I've been told is if that works in 20 minutes, but if you're Italian it takes an hour, because Italians like to talk a bit. so there's sort of cultural differences, but in Italy it takes the longest to deliver this poll, and we pay Gallup by the minute, so we appreciate it if all the Italians sort of just shorten their answers a bit. So the poll is evolving. So we first ran it in 2019, which was really interesting because it was the year before COVID hit, and it's the first year of the pre-COVID era, if you like. And we were experimenting a bit. We asked all the questions go down the left-hand side: everyday risks, perceptual experience, unique global data points. We ran it again in 2021, and we picked up some of the interesting things. And we started this resilience index. So thinking 2019 to 2021, what happened to the world? You know, the world went into this big lockdown and shock, and we were quite interested in what would change between 2019 and 2021. That proved very interesting in the resilience index, and I'll show you some of the results from that. 2023 data was collected last year, and we're just reporting it now. So yesterday was the first time reporting it, and I'm going to give you some previews of some of the data from that tonight. So it hasn't yet been launched, but I'm going to give you some of that data. And we're comparing right now 2025, what we're going to put out in 2025. Now, I've put at the top there cognitive testing before reaching question set. So when you ask somebody around the world, you have to ask them in their own language, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. When you ask a question about risk, that's a really difficult thing to communicate in different cultures and different languages. So you have to test all the questions beforehand. So we go through this thing called cognitive testing. That in itself could be a PhD subject, right? You know, if you ask somebody who has a native, I think it's Spanish, I can't remember which language it is, about risk, there's more of it, it's more like an opportunity. You know, so you sort of see risk in a more positive way, because of course risk means also an opportunity. It's the other side of it, but it's quite a cultural thing. And when we started this off, I wanted to ask people questions about mortality, like about what age do you think you'll die at? That is very taboo in many cultures. I just didn't realise, you know. I went in very naively. It's not something you can talk about. It's not a question you can ask on a poll. So we weren't able to ask those sort of questions. So we're learning all the time, but these are some of the interesting but also limiting factors around the poll. And we learn as we go. So we're learning, but also the United Nations and the kind of partners that we work with are learning. So what we have discovered along the way is people are very interested in this data. And since we launched our poll yesterday, we've had articles in the Washington Post, the Voice of America, the Malaysian Times. People have already picked up what we're doing, and they're now really engaged in what we want to do. We've had hundreds of new visitors to our website just in this last 24 hours since we opened up this one bit of data from this year, and visitors from over 40 countries. So this is a real resource. If you're in a country which doesn't have that kind of statistical reporting methodologies, then this might be your only opportunity to really understand some of what's going on in your population to do with risk. So what have we learned? Loads. That's the summary message here. This next part will be just about some unique data sets, and I'm going to get you to engage in this a bit. So if you've got your phone, please get it ready now. Not quite yet. So the headline, let's have a headline here. The headline here is that the greatest top of mind risk to people is road related accidents. If we say, what's the greatest source of risk in your life? 13% have road accidents at the top. Now you might think that's very low, right? But actually what that means is that it's very fragmented, all the other things that people are worried about in their lives. And so actually this is a very accurate representation of what's going to be the greatest risk, because road traffic accidents are the biggest source of risk. But if we look at number 2, people are worried consistently about violence and crime. That comes in at number 2 globally. So I'm worried about, being, in a traffic accident. I'm also consistently worried about violence and crime. Underneath that is some really interesting things. Cooking. I'm really worried about cooking. People get harmed in their homes cooking around the world. But wild dogs, that comes up. I'm really worried about wild dogs. And in one country, it's ghosts. I'm really worried about ghosts. So you don't actually know, really, what people are thinking about and the choices they make. Why don't you go out at night? Well, because of the ghosts. Okay. So you write it down. So that's 13% is the headline figure there. And now I'm going to ask you a question. So if you're in the room, if you're able to capture that QR code on your phones using your camera and then pressing, right? If that's not what you like to do, if you want to join at slido.com, you can join at slido.com using that number, logging in using that number. And the question here is, are you able to swim without assistance? Now, online, I hope you guys online are participating as well. I'll let this sort of settle down. I think you all seem like seasoned professionals, so this is one part of the technical evening that's going well. Yay, well done. So what have we got? What have we got from our participation? Oh good, we're getting some not round numbers. That means lots of people are taking part.
It's working online as well, Ruth.
Is it working online as well? Fantastic. So what have we got in this room? Are you able to swim without assistance? 93% of us watching this can swim without assistance, right? So this unique data set from our FAST Club, we said, can you swim without assistance, right? What did the world say? The world said a slight majority. So just more than half of the world can swim without assistance. I asked my partner earlier what he thought the answer would be. He said 3%. He thought 3% of the world would swim without assistance. So it's very interesting what where you were brought up and what your background is might tell you, whether you can swim or not. So if we go there, so that's about half the world. But let's look at that. Let's unpick that a bit. That varies hugely between rich countries and poor countries, right? So here we are in a rich country, high-income country, 75% of the people can swim. Well, and we're doing really well in this room and online, aren't we? Because we've got 92, whatever. But actually in low-income countries it goes down to 30. And what this one question in this one poll did was allow the OECD then to go on to a mapping of using that information, because this is a massive source of risk in lives. It's like number 2 or something in why do people die? Well, traffic accidents and then drowning, right? And so if we can make interventions, because we know where people can swim, and now we know where they can't swim, and we know what ages they can swim, and we know what genders can swim, and we know what religions can swim. We know all this now because of the World Risk Poll. So it's a fantastic resource, just that's one question. Right, next question. Are you all ready with your Slidos? Okay. When travelling in a motor vehicle, would you wear a seatbelt if one was available? So this is a one-off question that we asked as well. No? And we'll look at you. Now, I suspect this will stay at 100% because I think I know my audience, right? All right, so, 2%, somebody. Okay, somebody is
only after you prompt.
That's right. Maybe someone's just testing the no button there. So that's a really interesting one. It seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? So if we look at that, if we see what the world said, what did the world say to that question? The majority, so 78% said, if you're travelling, if I was in a vehicle with a seatbelt, I'll put the seatbelt on. 78%, you think, what's wrong? What's wrong? And then, so there's 21% that would say no, okay? Say no. And so what's that about? Well, if you split that down, so taking secondary sources of data in, you can say, right, are there any laws in these countries? And if you look at the compliance, where there's full seatbelt laws, you get 93%, right? We had 98% in this room. There's a full seatbelt law compliance in the UK. 93% of people will say yes. So, and if there's no seatbelt laws, that's where it goes down to the 58%. So this shows, and this is a bit of evidence around the combination of legislation and law, and sometimes you need a law to hammer home a safety message, right? People don't choose to be safe. Sometimes they need to be persuaded by legal means to take a safe option. So that was a piece of learning there. Right. So the poll can also shine light. We asked people, what's your understanding of risk? What do you fear? What are you worried about? We asked people, what do you actually experience? What have you experienced in your life? And we asked people who they trust, all right? So that was a really interesting thing. So if you want to make an intervention that works, then you have to ask who you trust. So here's an interesting slide. And who's occupational hygienist here? So this is about food. So in the first poll, we said, which one would you trust most to provide information about food safety? And of course, this gives interesting context, and we just pulled out 3 different countries here: China, India, and the United Kingdom. So you can see here in the United Kingdom, we've got a high level of trust in our government agencies and in medical professionals, and food labelling, right? You know, we look at a food label and we trust that to be true. You know, we've got allergies and intolerances, we trust that label. You can see in India and China that's not the case, right? So there's no trust in food labelling in those countries. There's high trust in medical professionals. In India, you're going to your friends and family. If your family say, this is good food, then you go, right? So these are different approaches. You know, in the UK, we have the sort of hygiene labels on the doors of a restaurant. that's the kind of thing we look for. Everyone's different. So that's an interesting thing. So it can shine a light on differences in trust. But not everyone likes to have that light shine. So interesting, that was 2019 poll, a question about food. In 2021, China stopped us. They stopped us asking questions about who we trust, okay? They were very proud in 2019 that they were highly trusted as a government. It was all in the China newspapers and everything, you know, didn't they do well? But they weren't going to take a chance on the 2021 poll, the post-COVID poll maybe, so there's some interesting stuff going on. They weren't going to take that chance, so they kind of edited out some of the questions out of our poll. And here you can see we asked a question about who you trust most to provide information about a possible disaster where you live. Oh, someone's going to start talking in a minute, aren't they? And here you can see China's doesn't feature on that, and we've got different things to learn about India and United Kingdom. Fair enough. But that's about trust, right? So, other things that we can learn. Benefits can offset worries, all right? So let's think about the psychology of risk. If you get a benefit, you might take a higher risk. So let's look at some examples of where that might happen. I think we're going to go for another Slido. Have you got your phones up? If you can get your phones ready, and let's put it up. All right. So the question is, do you think artificial intelligence will mostly help or mostly harm people in this country in the next 20 years, right? So is it a mostly help us or mostly harm us question? So answers are starting to come in, some opinions are starting to come in, right? So if you think, so what we're doing is a trade-off here, trade-off question. Is this going to be a good thing or a bad thing? Sort of, you know, get into people's heads a bit here. So here we go. We've got, in this audience of people in the UK, probably quite highly educated people. 50%, almost 50% said it will mostly help us. A quarter mostly harm us, and there's a bit of neither and don't know going on. That's great. So let's see what the world said on that. And here's the map which shows the ratio of people who said it will mostly help versus mostly harm by global region. So we can see over in the sort of blue bits, especially the dark blue bits, right? Really going to be helpful, right? This is going to be great. This is really going to help us. And you've got China storming in there, 4.4. So the ratio of this is a good thing that's going to happen. AI is good in China. It's a good thing. It's going to really help. And then over, you know, in Africa, mostly harm. You know, these are the. Now, if you think about that, right, you're trading off a benefit versus a risk, and sometimes you're trading off what you've been told about a benefit versus a risk. You're also, if you think, now where is AI being developed most? You know, who is benefiting? Where's profit being made as well from AI? Then you start to go, okay, you know, people trust the thing they sell or they make as well, you know, the people that they live with. So there's an interesting benefit-risk trade-off going on here. So another example of that benefit-risk trade-off, let's go to this one. A question that we asked to Canadians, right? Well, we asked everyone, but Canada's kind of interesting, right? So do you think climate change will be a threat to the people of your country in the next 20 years? And for the benefit of people who don't know Canada, here's a breakdown of different provinces. A threat or a threat to the people of your country? Let's have a look. So here you can see quite a difference within the same country of benefits or not benefits, right? Or threats. Alberta comes in at a skunkingly low 39%, which is quite off the charts even, you know, by global standards. So why could that be? Well, let's have a look. Let's have a look at where jobs related to oil are in Canada, right? So you can see conventional oil and gas extraction, non-conventional oil extraction, all focused around this area of Canada. So of course, climate change is not a problem. My job is to get this stuff out of the ground, get it out. Our whole economy is based on this. It's not a problem. You see similar things around the world where there's other oil producing states. So of course your perceptions of risk are all relevant, depends on your benefits. And then the final one I'm going to show here is global data and a special case of harm from work, all right? So this is worrying experience. If we look across the different types of worries that we have, and we have to have you experienced this, right? So the grey bit is, have you experienced this risk? Yes, I've been harmed by the work I do, 24%. Yes, I've got mental health issues. Yes, I've been hurt by the feeling. So these are kind of the grey bits of the experience. In all cases across there, are you worried about it? Yes, I'm really worried about it. The worry exceeds the experience, right? So in all cases, we're kind of worrying about things that we don't really need to worry about, or in the case of work, we're less worried, right? A quarter of us have been harmed by the work we do, but we're not so worried about that. That's really interesting. So what is that? What's that about? Actually, work, you get a benefit from work. You get money from work, and people are willing to do very dangerous jobs because they need to work, right? Because they need to get the money in. And that's a big driver. So we need to recognise that opportunity to have an income against the work. Now let's look at the UK, all right? And there'll be several slides about the UK, because the UK is just balmy sometimes. UK worrying experience, no worries, right? We are a nation that really does not worry. And what's that about? The grey bits again, our experiences. We've got like a mental health crisis going on here. 40% of people having crisis of mental health, well, we're really not worried about a lot. Isn't that interesting? And we can talk about that later. Is that because we have a social network, social services? Have we got a security network underneath us that makes us not worried? Isn't that a beautiful place to be, UK? That we're living in a state of absolute bliss in the world. So no worries. And just to point out then, between 2019 and 2021, we asked the same question about mental health, experience seriously harm mental health. That went up by 5 percentage points pre and post COVID. So you can see some of the effects that you might expect from COVID coming through there. Right. Another interesting question is about personal experience can influence perception. I'm going to have to really talk fast so we can get to the football here. Personal experience can influence perception, discrimination and trust. So we asked a question about, are you worried about your personal information being used by the government, right? And this is where it comes pink, very worried, somewhat worried, or not at all worried at the top, right? But if you then disaggregate that by people who have said that have you experienced discrimination in your life, if you have experienced discrimination, you are more likely to be very worried about how your data is used online, right? So your experience of exclusion or discrimination against you then carries over into your trust in institutions as well. So there's loads of PhDs in this, by the way. If you want to use this data, there's tons and tons of really interesting things to ask. Right. So the next sort of sector I'm going to talk about our resilience in a changing world. And this is a special product that we've drawn out of our data called the World Risk Poll Resilience Index. Okay. So as I said, we launched this yesterday, the latest poll. This is the third time we've polled it. And the headline there is that 30% of people have experienced a disaster related to a natural hazard. Now that has gone up 3% since we last asked 2 years ago. And those are all about flooding, right? So people are experiencing a lot more flooding events. And ironically, this lecture theatre flooded the other day. So for those of you in the front rows, you can see like there's something came up, groundwater or a burst pipe or something. Well, I assume it's groundwater because we were here in the basement. But it's kind of interesting when you start to see tracking through and you say, have you experienced a problem related with the weather? Yes, I've been subject to flooding now. So do have a look at that online, and it's sort of lighting up our part of the internet at the moment. I want to show you this World Risk Poll Resilience Index. I find it really interesting. I don't know if you can read it. So the index, like anything, it's not a truism, it's not a truth, but you can bring in lots of data sets in order to try and create something that helps you rank, helps you do things. What's in that index? We look at dimensions of your resilience, right, of a person's resilience. So there's an individual dimension. Are you in control of yourself? Do you feel able to act? Or what's your education? The next one is your household. Do you have enough money to keep your household going? Do you have an emergency plan? Do you have access to communications? The next one's about community and social capital. Do your neighbours care about you? Do you feel safe walking alone at night? Is your infrastructure good? And then at a social level, society level, are you subject to discrimination in your life? Do you think the government cares about you? And then, do you have confidence in these national institutions? So you can draw an index out from this, and then we use it to rank countries. And this is quite an interesting thing for some of these countries. And you can see there's a sort of resilience salami or something going on there, where you can put in the country, you can sort of disaggregate the data and find out what you want to find, right? So, Slido question, next Slido question, all right? So let's see how you guys in the room perform against some countries of the world. If a disaster were to occur near you in the future, do you have a plan that all the members of your family, of your household know about, right? So it's very interesting this. And again, this is another cognitive testing one. Some countries, they say no because they have a baby and the baby doesn't know about it. And then you think, oh, I shouldn't have asked that question. I should have said, so the next time we ask it, we're going to ask all members of your household over 10 years old because we got a lot of false negatives on this because we didn't specify the question. So what have we got here? We've got no, 84%, yes, 16%. Interesting. I sit on something called the National Preparedness Commission, which is full of people from leaders of society who are all like in the UK there to make us prepared, and it's like all the good and the great. And I asked this question around the table. I said, "Who's got a plan?" Nobody had a plan. It was like, okay, we need to put our money where our mouths are. We need to sort of invest in this. So, if a disaster would occur, do you have a plan? No. And that's pretty typical, I think, for the UK. But let's have a look what the world does. The world said, yes, 38% of the world have got a plan, right? Come on, Britain. No, 60%. And which countries? So, Southeast Asian countries top the list for preparedness, right? They know what to do when an emergency hits them. And the USA there, and that's, there's a culture in the USA of being ready and independent and all those sorts of things. Bottom of the list, people, it's kind of never happened or whatever. So it's just an interesting insight into how people live their lives, that there are countries where things happen and they're ready for it at a household level. Next question. So this is an interesting thing that's come out of our poll between 2021 and 23. So this is part of our latest data. Between 2021 and 2023 in Morocco, there was an earthquake, right? So this is kind of a top-of-mind risk, right? So in 2021, the grey, that was the resilience numbers that we had coming out of Morocco at different levels. 2023, you can see it drops, right? You can see there's a dip in all the resilience in Morocco. And when we look at that, what people might have experienced might have changed their minds. These two pink ones, they show a dip, right? So they're saying, can you protect yourself from a disaster? No. People thought before they could, but now they realise they can't protect themselves from a disaster, so their answers have changed because they've experienced an earthquake. Does the government care about you? No, we thought it did, but it doesn't, because we've realised we've now lived through this thing and the government doesn't care. Interesting though, on the community, the neighbours did care, right? We thought they didn't care, but actually during that earthquake, people came together, and now that number went up. So it's very interesting how you poll between different disasters. You can see actually people's perceptions and what they think after a disaster. And just so you can see it as well, this is the ranked list of countries. Country income can help in resilience. If you're rich, it absolutely helps in your resilience, but other factors are important. So there at number 2 we have Vietnam. At number 1 is Kuwait on this list. Up at the top we have Kuwait, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland. All the people, all the countries that you kind of think, if you had to put your money on it, you'd bet Switzerland was ready, right? and they are. This is the kind of thing that's up there. The UK is about a quarter of the way down, somewhere you can't see it, it's about here. There's the UK. And back down there, sort of right at the other end of the list, are Chad, Yemen, Afghanistan, and no real surprises. Countries in war, not resilient, no trust, no contingency. Next question. So, our attitudes to technologies. Do technologies help or harm us? I've just put these data in. This is from the 2019 poll, slightly different format. So we can see there that GMOs we're most sceptical about GMOs compared to nuclear power we asked about, and artificial intelligence. This is 2019, remember, so things happen quickly. And then I saw there were lots of nuclear people who had signed up, nuclear regulators signed up for this lecture, maybe online, maybe in the room. So I pulled out the nuclear, I disaggregated some of the nuclear work so you can see that. So it's very interesting. Global averages mask stark differences. In Southern Europe, in Northern Europe, there's a lot more scepticism about nuclear than there is in the rest of the world. When you say people are suspicious about nuclear, we have to bring all people along. It's a very Western problem. Other countries do not see nuclear in such a bad light. And then if you say if nuclear will mostly harm or mostly help people in the next 10 years, you can look at their educational levels as well. That people who are educated for longer thinks it will help us more. So some interesting ways you can disaggregate the data, especially when you look at new technologies and adoption of new technologies. Right, are you still with me, or are you thinking about the football, right? So this is like halfway through, but I will speed up the last bits, right? So, are you thinking about the football? If you're thinking about the football, here are the participants in Group C of the European Cup, right? And I would like you to go onto your Slido and rank these countries. I haven't tried this one myself. Apparently you can slide them up and down and rank them, right? Based on the proportion of the population who see their neighbours care about them a lot, right? So the highest at the top, which of these countries would say their neighbours care about them a lot? And which ones are the worst, right? So here we go. Everyone's. This is great. Well done, everyone, for leaning into this. All right, so this is what we're predicting at the moment, right? We think Danish people are, neighbour friendly. That's what's happening here. And Slovenians, England and Serbia. Ooh, look at that. Bit of jostling around. Some history going on here. So well done, everyone, for participating. Right. So that's what we said. Denmark at the top, Slovenia, England third, and so. So what's the actual results? Let's take a look. Interesting, right? Now, isn't this interesting, right? English people think their neighbours care about them. English people think they have good neighbours. Interestingly, not Scottish and Welsh and Irish, they bring the number down for the UK. But English people rank at the top of this. Do your neighbours care about your well-being? Now, I predict that this might also be the outcome of Group C, but let's see. But that was one of those ones where how you hold a country in your mind is not necessarily how it plays out in individual opinions. Okay? Interesting. Thank you for joining in that little thought exercise. Back to the poll, back to the Reuters poll. The world of work, and lots of you here are interested in occupational health and safety, so the rest of this is like all the way down now into occupational health and safety, the world of work. Why should we worry about it? These facts and figures. These are old stuff. I'm really sorry, Andrew. This is from your original report. And way back in 2015, 2014, these are the kind of statistics. Why should we worry about this? Why is it important? So we should worry about it. The World Risk Poll, therefore, has included modules on this in all three so far of its modules. The first one, we just asked some basic questions: have you been harmed at work, that sort of thing. Then we went into a specific model, violence and harassment, and the one that we've just done or about to publish is about workplace harm and safety training. So I'm just going to give you some headlines from all of those. 22% of people have been harmed at work. All right, that's a large amount of people. Yeah, that is globally. That's a global thing. And it's not even harmed. Have you been seriously injured at work? 22% of people. It's a lot. And then you look at that 2019 poll, you can see where people have been harmed. Look, Sierra Leone, almost 70% of people have been seriously injured at work. Right? Gambia, Malawi, these are not good places to go to work and to come home safe, right? So that's, and then the bottom three, you've got Italy, Singapore, and Poland, interesting. Percentage of workers by business owners, professionals. So as you might imagine, as we know that farmers, farm workers, fishermen, construction, these are the most hazardous professions, and that men, are more likely to get harmed, seriously injured at work. So these are sort of, But now we've got the data to prove it, right? So we've got data here, which is very interesting. It's reported data, not collected data, but it's still data. It's how people experience these things. So, if we say, have you ever been seriously injured at work? Yes, 22%. Who's most responsible for your safety other than yourself? Most people say your employer is, compared to the government or someone else, right? Interestingly though, what have I done? I have gone into a different mode on my laptop. Right, so if we most see their employers as responsible, okay, right, but people who have been injured, so out of the 22%, people see an increased role for governments. If you have been injured, you think the government should be more responsible, right? That kind of increases there. And then we are also asked, do you see safety rules as a good thing? Is it a good thing, or does it make your job more difficult? And people embrace safety rules. Okay, so all of that British thing about health and safety gone mad and the rest of it, actually, people appreciate and want safety rules. If you've ever been seriously injured at work, you appreciate safety rules. But here's a bizarre one I don't understand. This decreases in those who've been injured, okay? So, and this is in the UK only, not the rest of the world. So in the UK, if you've been seriously injured at work, you think safety rules are not a good thing. And I don't really understand that, and that goes counter to the rest of the world, okay? So everyone else in the world, if you've been injured, you actually think safety rules are a very good thing. In the UK, if you've been injured, you think they're not good. Maybe that's the reason they're injured. Maybe they're not. Who knows, right? There could be all sorts of reasons underneath this, right? So if you've got any answers to this, you can help us understand this. So essentially, we just give the data. We don't interpret the data. You guys are the ones that, have better understanding of context and that sort of thing. You might go, of course, when you're seeing this data, you might be just like, that makes perfect sense to me. It doesn't necessarily to everyone. All right. When we, and then in October 2024, this year, we're going to be reporting on workplace harm and safety training. So we asked a whole lot of questions about training, and questions about have you told people, and I'll just give you a quick little insight into what our. So I'm going to ask you in this room, have you received any health and safety training for work in the past 2 years? All right. So who's in this room? Can you please tell us, have you received health and safety training? Everyone's getting very good at this. So clicking on. So we're kind of resting around 67%, 30%. So 67% said yes, I have, and 32% said no, I haven't in the last 2 years. So in the UK, that's almost representative. This is what it looks like in the UK. Yes, I have in the last 2 years. Yes, I have ever. But 35% have never received any occupational health and safety training in their workplace in the UK. So, interesting. But this room is quite representative. And of course, things we know, so we're saying construction workers in the UK are most likely to have received occupational health and safety training. In the UK, look at these great numbers, but if we ask the world, it's not the global story, okay? So, have you ever received training? You look at South Asia, Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, very low preparedness to be safe at work, okay? So this is not a global picture, and if you think about our supply chains, if you think about the responsibilities we should be taking in a global way, this is not a good picture. This is not good. Right, in the UK, and another interesting, is this right or not, those who have received training are most likely to say they've experienced harm as well. Now, have you received training because you're in a high hazard industry, therefore you're most likely to, could be that, so that's an interesting new piece of data for everyone, all right? But in the UK, those who have received training are less likely to tell someone about harm at work. What's that about? And I think that goes counter to global as well. So if you receive the training, you're less likely to tell someone that you've been hurt. Okay, UK, what are we doing? So question comes out of that, how do we interpret these results? And now to finish off, and I'm going to do a big gallop down, we're going to have a bit of violence and harassment thrown in just to finish the evening ready for the football. So violence and harassment, let's have a think about that. Now, why are we interested in violence and harassment? So in 2019, we got some weak signs from our data when we were asking people over on the right-hand side, what are your top perceived risks at work by region? So excluding trips and falls, because trips and falls always comes out high, what are the top perceived risks? Down at the North and Western Europe, oh look, physical violence and harassment comes out there, right? What's that about? Because physical violence and harassment is not an accidental thing. It tends to be intentional, and it makes it very shocking. Are we intentionally harming the people around us? Very interesting, this data. When I dug into it for another talk I gave, I pulled out the USA. In the USA, they actually reported data, and they had like 400 or something deaths at work because of violence from co-workers. So you can kind of, like, different countries, different cultures, what's causing this little purple thing here. The other thing I just wanted to show you is this interesting graph on the left. When we took some external data as well, and we asked people that year, are you free to report safety problems without fear of punishment? Again, some sort of harassment, some sort of thing going on at work. Well, it correlates kind of nicely that against the UL Safety Index, which is an external index of safety, you can kind of see the high-income countries clustering at the top there. They're safe. You feel free to report. Harm without fear. It decreases, as you get poorer and poorer. And then what is happening in Pakistan? What's happening there? You can't. There's such a fear of reporting something, such a fear of saying that you've been hurt, that you can't report it. So we worked with the ILO. So after we saw this, we worked with the International Labour Organization. They were very interested in this. Why were they interested in this? They were interested because they were trying to bring a treaty in, a global treaty, to address violence and harassment, and to get countries to sign up to that treaty, right? So they sponsored an additional model in 2021 around violence and harassment to try and fill that knowledge gap. What do we know about violence and harassment? The questions were slightly different, but here's some interesting results from that. That in 2021, 1% of workers said that they had ever experienced violence and harassment while at work. So ever, right? We asked them, have you ever experienced this? 21% of workers said they had, right? So if you break that down, and this is interesting, the purple is the violence and harassment outcome here, physical violence or harassment at work. If you are a poor man, you are like 4 times more likely to experience violence and harassment at work than somebody who is in a richer economy, in a richer place, okay? Then you can see, interesting, over the high income end, you can see this uptick, right? So what's that about? So being poor is a huge indicator of experiencing violence and harassment at work, and then there's a sort of uptick at the far end rich area. So we can talk about this later, and I've got my theories on this, okay? So then men have a slightly higher experience of violence and harassment than women globally, okay, maybe for whatever reasons. And then I just wanted to show you this. It's one of the sort of impact measures over at the Senate of the Philippines. Our data was used to help ratify the treaty in the Philippines, so the parliamentarians were able to use the data from the Philippines to say, look, there's been this global survey done, we are bad at this, we need to ratify this into our law. So this kind of data is being used in action, and we're very proud when our data can be used in this way. But in the UK and other Western countries, the numbers flip. So women are more susceptible to be subject to violence and harassment. So in Western countries, it's the women who experience the violence and harassment at work, not the men, right? So why? Why could this be? A third of the violence and harassment experience by women had a sexual element to it. Okay. Now we couldn't ask these questions in all countries, as you can imagine. This isn't, people will not answer you, or you're not even allowed to sort of use the kind of words that we need to use. But a third of violence and harassment experienced by women had a sexual element. Women are far more likely to experience sexual violence and harassment. So here's the sort of aggregation. We broke it down by all sorts of combinations, but this is what it boils down to. And here's the United Kingdom in the middle. So the pink is no sexual element to the violence and harassment, and the orange is a sexual element to the violence and harassment. So of course, what we're seeing here is that number of about women experiencing them. And then, are you able, and this shocks me, some of this data, are you able to tell someone about your experience? There's the United Kingdom right in the middle of that. You've got Algeria, very open, very able to talk to people about this kind of thing. Down at the far end, you've got Pakistan again. That outlier that we saw in the 2019 data comes out again in 2021. People will not talk about this stuff, right? Is it forbidden or whatever it is? If you told someone, who did you tell? I told my friends and family, right? I told my friends and family. I might have told a co-worker. I'm less likely to have told my employer, or let alone go to the police or anything like that. Okay, so I talked to my family about this, right? More than half of people who experienced it and didn't tell anyone said they thought it would be a waste of time. So if you didn't tell anyone about it, why didn't you tell anyone because it's a waste of time? The bits that shock me, which go to the right hand side of this graph, is about I feared for my reputation, right? Why didn't I tell? Because I thought I would be. People would think badly of me that I was harassed, right? There's a sort of, we call it victim blaming or victim shaming in this country. Worried that people at work would find out, You're worried that your co-workers will find out that you've been a victim of violence and harassment. These are very interesting things to unpick socially. And then let's look at the UK. Interesting. All right, so here in the UK, the reasons why you didn't tell anyone about experience, it's just a waste of time. It's just a waste of time. Not so much of the fear of reputation, not so much worried people will find out. Just, why bother? Why bother telling anyone what's happened to me? So a waste of time is what comes out in the UK. I'm almost finished. That's the last data that I've got. So finally, I just want to tell you the future of the Wellness Poll. We've got 2023, and I'll show you which reports are coming out this year. So 2023 is the polling, 2024 is when we report it. So we collect all the data last year. And then looking forward to 2025, everyday risks, we're going to carry on with that module about everyday risks. We're going to carry on with the resilience index because it's so interesting to especially aid agencies and relief agencies. We're going to have second order perceptions of risk. Now, I was like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What's the plain English for that? What it means is, do you think your neighbours are worried about climate change, right? Do you think your employer? So basically, it's not about you. Are you worried about it? It's like, do you think that other people are worried about this? And the reason we're interested in that is because it affects how you think as well. If you think other people think something, it changes the way that you think as well. So second order perceptions of risk, and then we're also going to be looking at transport and critical infrastructure and safety, coming out of some of that, road accidents being the biggest ones. So the last one coming in 2024, what are we going to be publishing? So out of the 23 data, we've just published yesterday the Resilience and Resilience Index report. You can find it on the website. It's a beautiful piece of work. We have done, for the first time, this is a one-off study about waste and waste disposal and waste collection globally, because waste is a huge hazard globally. People burning waste, people dumping waste, it's a huge hazard, but we don't have a global data set to say, what do you do with your waste? Do you burn it, collect it, bury it, dump it? What happens with it, right? So that's a big data set that the United Nations Environment Programme have supported for us. Another one on workplace harm and safety training, which you've seen a preview of the data, but there'll be tons more about health and safety training, and you'll be able to disaggregate that. And everyday risks and perceptions and experiences will come out in November. So that's the schedule for publishing this year. finally to say thank you very much to you all for being here. Kick-off has happened, but you're still here, no one exited at 5. Thank you so much. And if you are interested in any of the data, you can that QR code will take you to the website. There's very easy data explorers in there, and if you have any questions or if you want any help to get through that data, we have an email address that you can use it. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. I'm getting some online claps as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Really, really interesting stuff. And as that data emerges, I think there'll be more and more questions that clearly we will want to ask of it going forward. But opportunity for questions both in the room and online. So if you're asking a question online, if you could put it into the chat, then we'll ask it in the room. But let's start with any questions from the audience here. Yes, Paddy.
Hello.
There was 2 bits that really stuck out for me. One was when you talked about AI and its perceived risk to the future, and you compared it to how the benefits works. Yet the people that thought it was at most risk were the states, and they're getting the most benefit of developing AI. So at the forefront of that, and then the other was around nuclear, where we, the Western countries, have greatest benefit from nuclear because we've given us strong energy from nuclear compared to southern countries. And then my question is all of that perception around our media intake and their perception of those 2 risk factors, because they are complete outliers to our benefits versus risk.
And of course, all I'm doing is showing you data, right? What I'm not doing is trying to interpret that. Now, what you've done is put a load of interpretation on that. Is it the media? Is it, and in your view, so if I was saying, how do what do you think? In your view, you see a benefit from the nuclear, right? In many people, as the data tells us, many people don't see the benefit in this part of the world from the nuclear. They're very sceptical about it being a helpful thing. So, all I can put out is the data, and I think it's up to other people to interpret it. Then, why is it? It may be that there's been more of a public discourse in this country about nuclear problems. Right? It may be that in this part of the world we've had more nuclear accidents. Right? So it may be that in our living memory, that's why it's coming out as a much more negative public perception of nuclear than it is in other parts of the world. Who knows? But you could, people who understand and who study these things will know. The making use of data.
That begs another question, I think, which is, as you've said all the way through, you're not interpreting, but what you're providing is an enormously powerful tool for hypothesis generation.
That hypothesis generation tool.
So, how do you therefore sort of manage that interface between generating a hypothesis and getting somebody to test that hypothesis? So I suppose the question is about that interface with the academic community and how you can make the information more available and visible to them so that they can use that information.
Absolutely. So all of the information, all the data is freely available. It's part of it. We're a charity. It's part of our mission. It's all available to everyone, to governments, to whoever, academics, whoever wants to use it, NGOs. How people take data and how they interpret it is, can be subject to all sorts of biases and all that sort of thing, right? But what we also do is we provide funding through calls. We call it World Risk Call into Action. We have competitive calls. We have a lot of universities around the world asking, applying for that money in order to take the data and to test it against external data sets, to test it in action in their own localities, so that's one way. And then of course the second way is learning as you go through. So we saw the violence and harassment thing. We might have asked a clumsy question. Like we did about your household plans. Does everyone in your household know? Well, no, my baby doesn't know what to do. Right? So we should learn. So we learn as we go, and we test our hypothesis by asking 3 or 4 different questions coming from a different angle, just to see if we confirm that. So these UN agencies we're now working with who see so much value in this data, they're helping us to work through on that hypothesis testing as well, because they want to know, because they have all this money to direct, and this is very actionable data.
Yes,
First of all, thanks for the presentation. It makes it feel good for the progress of the science. Here, I think you are more only focusing on deductive reasoning, and inductive reasoning is up to the user, and the abductive part is not focusing on it here. And my question is, when you use this deductive reasoning here, there's a high chance of having missing variables, so the conclusions might be wrong due to missing variables. In real researchers, what are the approaches people found to avoid that trap of deductive reasoning?
Yes, so you absolutely have to understand the shortcomings of this data. It's really important, what we're asking people, that's why we call it voices, we're asking people what's your view, what's your view and what's your experience. That doesn't mean that it's true or not true, it doesn't mean that you understand what you're doing or anything like that. But if you're afraid of ghosts and you don't go out at night, that's quite an important thing to understand about your population or your community, whatever it is, right? It doesn't mean that it's the truth, right? But what it is, it gives someone a voice to say, this is how I experience the world, right? And that is a very valuable thing, and it's a right. People want to be asked. The interesting thing when you go around, and I showed a picture at the beginning, people go and sit down with you in your house and ask you. Nobody's ever asked them these questions before. What is it you worry about? What's your experience in life? We do have safeguarding teams that go around after. Gallup has safeguarding because sometimes people say things, and you're like, this is really bad. This person fears for their life right now in this place, right? So how do you feel that? It's a very difficult thing to ask people about what they're afraid of right there. Do we have?
So
a question online.
Question online. So it's from Louise Wright. Thank you, Louise. For those of us working in safety in a global industry, how can we use the insights from this poll to educate people in risk, in brackets harm, in countries where it is not recognised, especially where we want industry to do more to protect life?
Well, I think there's some very useful voices. I call it voices because it's not reports. You can use it because you want to understand people. Why do you listen to people? Why do we listen to each other? Because we want to get a better understanding of each other's lived experience. We use that phrase a lot. What is their lived experience? You can't. But you can try to impose things top down. So we've seen, if you put a seatbelt law in place, you're more likely to drive a behaviour. But if you don't have the bottom up, can you afford the seatbelt? Can you afford not to go to work? If there are sort of multiple factors that come into this, and you can see it playing out in the data. That I have been harmed. 70% of people in the Gambia, whatever, have been harmed at work, but I'm still going to work. Right? I'm still got to go to work. So it's very useful from that perspective. And like we saw in the Philippines, they took that violence and harassment data and it kind of opened up a conversation that allowed them to ratify a law about violence and harassment. So whether you use it with your government, whether you use it in your trade union, whether you use it with your employer, you can use it with an NGO, you can use it in a university, the data allows you to move yourself towards a common understanding of what an experience of safety is like. And I should have started off, everyone has not only the right to be safe, right? You should go home at the end of a working day, but also to feel safe. Feeling safe is a fundamental part of your psychology. Great Britain, UK, you saw that. No one saw it in the UK. Fundamentally, everyone feels kind of safe and secure here for some reason. You can see the rest of the world does not feel like that, and that feeling of instability is crippling. It's crippling to individuals and crippling to economic development. It's crippling to all sorts of things. If you don't feel safe, you can't live a full life.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Ruth asked me a question. It shows how different people interpret different things. She said, "Do you have a plan if a disaster happens?" And I said, "My plan is to die." So I do have a plan. So there's a philosophical reasoning, and people come at the questions different ways. So that was very interesting. Thank you.
And it's very interesting, even philosophically, because you can correlate this against things like religious belief as well, and some parts of the world which might have more fatalistic philosophies, for whatever reason, whether it's a religion or a cultural thing, a faithlistic philosophy, which will take you towards, you don't need a plan.
Here we use the data to explanation, that's one approach. Other approach is explanation to data. It's called abduction. Different philosophical things.
Absolutely. So you hypothesis test or you get data driven, but whatever it is, this is good for even a dinner party, right? If you want to open up a conversation, you can open it up around this data. Yeah.
I've got no more questions online currently. No.
Yes, Helen.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. That was really interesting. I just wondered how you identified the themes for the questions that you asked. So I know you did AI in 21.
Yeah.
I think you were going to do transport in 25.
Yeah.
Do they come out of the surveys before, or are they part of other studies?
Okay, so all of that actually comes out of our mission as a foundation. So when you're a charity, you have to spend your money on what we call your charitable objects. And our charitable objects are all around safety of life and property, around critical infrastructure especially, right? So that took us to trying to ask about things which we thought were critical infrastructure. Things like food, we'll ask questions about the water that comes through. I mean, there's a lot more questions there. Is the water you drink safe, that sort of thing. So we think about that critical infrastructure. Being at work as well, and trying to disaggregate that by sectors. That's in our mission space. But actually, our other part of our mission, so we've got safety, the other part of our mission is actually about public education. And so beyond trying to get good, insightful data about safety and feeling safe and risk, we're actually also on a journey to educate people and even just start those conversations around safety. Let's start a conversation about, does your household have a plan? If you don't, is it because you just plan to die? Or is it because, if you're in the Vietnam or because you actually experience typhoons every single year and you want to know where your family are, when that typhoon rolls in. So there are lots of interesting conversations, but the reason we pick those things are because of our mission. So we're trying AI, that will be built into infrastructure, nuclear, it's a technology. So we're just trying to understand as infrastructure gets built out what are people's approaches and trust. And what actual harm they experience. Have you been injured? Have you been injured in a car crash?
So I'll go back to the online.
Yes, I've got a question from Neil Bourne, our co-director.
Hi, Neil.
He
Hello,
says,
Neil.
thank you so much for being our Ashton lecturer, Ruth. Fascinating data and trends. Do you have examples of how users of your data have acted on it and made a difference?
Yeah, so this is our big thing, I showed you a couple of examples there of action. So the ratification in the Philippines, using that data, how the OECD took that one question about swimming, and then were able to sort of roll that out. So what I would say is that most of the interventions that come from this, at the moment we're seeing the things that come from at the UN level, because so, for example, the UN Disaster Risk Agency, UNDR, or UN Disaster Reduction and Relief Agency, we're having a webinar with them next week, if anyone wants to join in. What they have said to us, they use it as a hypothesis test. So basically they're saying, when we roll out a relief programme and we try and mobilise resources in the event of a disaster, we now use this data to say where is more resilient and less resilient, where are the places that we need to get to or to put more resources into because they are unable to last more than a week on, without food, without any more money. So it's a risk identification process. But Neil will be evaluating this, and our partner evaluator is actually in the room here today. We will be evaluating the World Risk Poll in this coming year, because as you can see, we funded 4 rounds of it, and that was it, right? And it's very expensive data. This is really expensive to get. So we need to have some, a really good viewpoint. And is this worth continuing with? Because it is expensive. Should we change it to every 3 years, every 4 years? There's all sorts of statistical things that you can do with this. But what we have seen, is this massive pick-up. Every year we run it, we get more and more interest, more and more people using it. So it feels like there's an interest. Thanks, Neil.
And thanks for joining us from Venice, Neil,
Oh,
which is
great. Oh.
where he is at the moment. Any final questions? Yes.
Just occurred to me, do you have any feedback, or you said it was to generate hypotheses and so forth, but some of these might be interpreted in certain ways that might be incorrect. So, for instance, the seatbelt one, that could be, having more laws encourages seatbelt wear, or it could be that in countries where people are generally wearing seatbelts anyway, they're more amenable or might even demand laws for that. So which way round it's interpreted? And you said it was kind of a hypothesis generating tool.
Yeah.
If government bodies or policymakers interpret your data in a certain way, do you warn them that it could be misinterpretation, or just let people have at it?
Well, at the moment, we let people have at it. We provide funding on a competitive basis for good quality propositions from all around the world. Like from global, good, and that's all peer reviewed. So you can't stop your data being used in different ways. You could twist so much of this data just in something different, and that's that will happen. But what we try and encourage is good quality. We also run a cohort of people working on the data to work on it together, so that you can kind of call out if it's being used badly, and essentially the cohort is there to encourage each other to work together across the world on using the data and sharing findings. But you could, a similar cohort could also call out bad examples of data like this being used in a non-thorough way. But we're not resourced to follow through and piece everything in that way. It's a good question,
Okay. I think that's it for questions online and questions in the room. So, huge thanks again, Ruth. I've always enjoyed working with the Lloyds Social Foundation. It's always fun. It's always a bit different, and that review that we worked on all those years ago was a really interesting insight into the gaps that there were. And it's great to see those gaps being filled by something that I think is probably globally unique when it comes to the understanding of risk. So, really grateful for your presentation, and can we end by thanking Ruth and New York. Thank you.